Emma had always believed she understood her family completely. At 28 years old, she worked as a primary school teacher in the peaceful English town of Millbrook. This was the same small town where she had spent her entire childhood, running through the narrow streets and playing in the local park. Her life was simple but content. 5 years ago, tragedy had struck when her parents, Robert and Margaret, died in a terrible car accident during a winter storm. The loss had been devastating for Emma, but she held on to the beautiful memories they had created together. Their old cottage, filled with family photographs and cherished belongings, had become her sanctuary. Every corner of the house reminded her of Sunday morning breakfasts, evening stories by the fireplace, and the gentle laughter that had once filled every room. Just 3 months earlier, another sadness had touched Emma's life. Her beloved grandmother, Rose, who had lived to the remarkable age of 92, had peacefully passed away in her sleep. Rose had been like a second mother to Emma, especially after her parents died. The elderly woman had shared countless stories about the family's history, and had always been there with a warm hug and wise advice. Now Emma found herself the owner of 2 cottages filled with nearly a century of family memories. For weeks she had avoided the difficult task of sorting through her grandmother's belongings. The thought of packing away Rose's life felt overwhelming and final. On a particularly gloomy Saturday morning in late autumn, with rain drumming steadily against the windows, Emma finally gathered the courage to begin. She decided to start with her grandmother's attic, knowing it would be the most challenging part. The narrow wooden stairs creaked under her feet as she climbed up. Carrying a torch and several empty boxes, the attic was exactly as she remembered. From childhood visits, cramped, dusty, and filled with the musty smell of old wood and forgotten things. Weak sunlight struggled through a small round window, casting strange shadows across the cluttered space. Everywhere Emma looked, she saw pieces of family history. There were boxes of Christmas decorations that had been used for decades, including the same paper angel that had topped their tree every year. Faded floral curtains were folded neatly in one corner, probably saved by Rose, who never threw anything away. Emma worked methodically, sorting items into piles. Some things would go to charity, others would be kept for their sentimental value, and a few would unfortunately need to be thrown away. She found boxes of old photographs showing her grandparents as a young couple, her parents as children, and herself as a baby. Each image brought back a flood of memories and emotions. As the morning progressed, Emma struggled to move a particularly heavy wooden trunk that had been pushed against the far wall. The trunk was old and solid, probably containing winter clothes, or blankets that Rose had stored away. As Emma managed to shift it slightly to one side, she heard a soft thud from behind it, as if something small had fallen to the floor. Curious, Emma squeezed into the narrow space between the trunk and the wall. Her fingers searched the dusty floorboards until they found a small object that had been hidden in the shadows. She pulled it out and discovered a tiny wooden jewelry box, no larger than her palm. The wood was dark with age but smooth to the touch, as if it had been handled and cherished by many hands over the years. The box had a simple brass clasp that opened easily despite its age. Inside, Emma found several layers of yellowed tissue paper, carefully wrapped round something precious. Her heart began to beat faster with anticipation as she slowly unwrapped the delicate layers. What she discovered took her breath away completely. Nestled in the tissue paper was a black and white photograph, slightly faded but still clear. The image showed 2 teenagers standing close together on what appeared to be a beach. They were both laughing at something outside the camera's view, their faces bright with joy and young love. The girl had familiar eyes and a smile that Emma recognized immediately. It was definitely her mother, Margaret. The boy beside her had the same gentle expression and kind face that Emma remembered from her father, Robert, But this discovery made no sense at all. Emma stared at the photograph in confusion and growing amazement. Throughout her entire life, her parents had told her the same story about how they had first met. They had always said they were introduced at university when they were both 20 years old, studying in different courses but brought together by mutual friends at a social event. Emma turned the photograph over with shaking hands. There, written, in faded blue ink, was a date that made her world suddenly feel unstable. 1985. She quickly calculated in her head. If this date was correct, it meant her parents had known each other and been together 3 full years before they claimed to have first met. Emma sank down onto the dusty attic floor. Still holding the mysterious photograph, she studied every detail of her parents' young faces. They looked so incredibly happy, so natural together, so deeply in love. This was not the awkward beginning of a new relationship. This was a photograph of two people who had already shared many precious moments together. The implications of this discovery slowly began to sink in. If her parents had lied about when they first met, what other parts of their story might not be completely true? Emma felt a strange mixture of emotions washing over her. There was curiosity about what secrets her family might have been keeping, sadness that her parents had felt the need to hide part of their past, and excitement about possibly learning something new about the people she thought she knew better than anyone in the world. The afternoon light filtering through the small attic window seemed to illuminate the photograph in her trembling hands, as if the universe was encouraging her to discover the truth about her family's hidden history. Emma found herself unable to concentrate on anything except the mysterious photograph she had discovered in her grandmother's attic. The image of her teenage parents laughing together on that beach had completely taken over her thoughts. She carried the small black and white picture with her everywhere she went, tucked safely in her handbag like a precious secret. During her lunch breaks at the primary school where she taught, Emma would sit alone in the staff room and study every detail of the photograph. She examined her mother's young face, so full of joy and life, and her father's gentle smile that she remembered so well from her childhood. The more she looked at it, the more questions filled her mind. Why had they lied about when they first met? What had happened during those mysterious 3 years they had never mentioned? At night, before going to sleep, Emma would place the photograph on her bedside table and stare at it by lamplight. She tried to imagine what her parents had been thinking when the picture was taken. They looked so carefree and happy without any of the quiet sadness that she sometimes remembered seeing in their eyes when she was growing up. The mystery was consuming her daily life. Emma found it difficult to focus on teaching her young students, and she often caught herself daydreaming about the secrets her family might have been keeping. She knew she needed to find someone who could help her understand the truth about her parents' past. After a week of endless wondering, Emma decided to visit Mrs. Peterson, an elderly woman who lived just a few streets away from her cottage. Mrs. Peterson was nearly 80 years old and had been her parents' closest friend for as long as Emma could remember. The kind woman had known Robert and Margaret since they were all children growing up in Millbrook together. If anyone in the town would know about her parents' teenagers, it would surely be Mrs. Peterson. On a quiet Thursday evening, Emma walked through the familiar streets to Mrs. Peterson's small terraced house. The autumn air was crisp and cool, and yellow leaves covered the pavements like a golden carpet. Emma's heart was beating fast with nervousness as she approached the front door. She was not sure if she was ready to hear whatever truth Mrs. Peterson might reveal. Mrs. Peterson answered the door with her usual warm smile. But Emma noticed how the elderly woman's expression changed the moment she saw what Emma was holding. The photograph seemed to have an immediate impact on Mrs. Peterson, who invited Emma inside quickly and closed the door behind them They sat in Mrs. Peterson's cozy living room, surrounded by family photographs and comfortable old furniture. Emma carefully placed the mysterious photograph on the coffee table between them. Mrs. Peterson picked it up with trembling hands and stared at it for a long moment. "Oh, my dear Emma," Mrs. Peterson said softly, and Emma could see tears beginning to form in the elderly woman's eyes. She sat down heavily in her favorite armchair, as if the photograph had suddenly made her feel very tired. "I have been wondering when this day would finally come." Emma felt her heart skip a beat. "You know about this photograph?" she asked, her voice so quiet it was almost a whisper. Mrs. Peterson nodded slowly, still looking at the image of Emma's teenage parents. "Your mother and father were childhood sweethearts. Dear, they lived just 2 streets apart from each other and had known each other since they were very small children. They were inseparable as teenagers, completely in love." Emma leaned forward in her chair, desperate to hear more. "But why did they tell me they met at university? Why did they lie about it?" Mrs. Peterson's face became very sad, and she wiped away a tear with her handkerchief. "Something happened when they were 17 years old, Emma. Something that changed everything about their lives and their future together." The elderly woman stood up slowly and walked to an old wooden cupboard in the corner of the room. She opened one of the drawers and carefully removed a small bundle of letters that were tied together with a faded blue ribbon. The paper looked old and yellowed, and Emma could see that some of the letters had been read many times. "Your mother gave me these letters many years ago," Mrs. Peterson explained as she returned to her chair. "She asked me to keep them safe. For her, Margaret said that someday you might need to understand what had happened in their past." Emma's hands were shaking as Mrs. Peterson placed the bundle of letters in her lap. She untied the ribbon carefully and began to read the first letter. It was written in her mother's handwriting, but much younger and less careful than Emma remembered. The letter was addressed to her father and was clearly a love letter between 2 teenagers who cared deeply for each other. As Emma continued reading through the letters, she began to see a story unfold. The early letters were full of happiness, plans for the future, and the innocent excitement of first love. But as she read the later letters in the bundle, the tone began to change dramatically. The words became filled with sadness, fear, and talk of difficult decisions that had to be made. One letter mentioned having to give up something precious, and another spoke about doing what is best. When it breaks our hearts, Emma could feel the pain and heartbreak in her mother's words, even though she did not yet understand what had caused such sadness. "I cannot tell you the complete story, Emma," Mrs. Peterson said gently, watching as Emma read through the emotional letters. "That was your parents' burden to carry, and it was their choice whether to share it. But I will tell you this much. Everything they did was done out of love. Love for each other, and love for their children." Emma looked up sharply from her letters. Mrs. Peterson had said children. Not child, but children, meaning more than one. Emma felt the room begin to spin round her as the implication of this word hit her like a physical blow. "Mrs. Peterson," Emma whispered, her voice filled with shock and disbelief. "Are you saying that I have a brother or sister somewhere?" Mrs. Peterson's tears began to flow more freely, and her silence gave Emma the answer even before the elderly woman found the courage to speak. "Your parents carried that pain with them for 30 long years, dear Emma. They never stopped loving their first child, but they felt at the time that they had no other choice." Emma returned home from Mrs. Peterson's house with the bundle of letters clutched tightly in her hands. Her mind was spinning with the shocking revelation that she had an older sibling somewhere in the world. The familiar rooms of her cottage felt different now, as if everything she thought she knew about her family had been turned upside down. She made herself a cup of tea with trembling hands and sat down at her kitchen table. The letters were spread out in front of her, and Emma began to read them more carefully than before. Each letter revealed another piece of the puzzle that had been her parents' secret past. The first few letters were beautiful love letters between two teenagers who were completely devoted to each other. Robert wrote about how Margaret made him feel like the luckiest person in the world. Margaret wrote about their dreams of getting married someday and having a family together. Emma smiled through her tears as she read about their innocent plans for the future. But as Emma continued reading, the tone of the letters began to change dramatically. There were mentions of being scared and not knowing what to do. Margaret wrote about feeling sick every morning and being afraid to tell her parents. Robert wrote about wanting to do the right thing, not having any money or support from their families. Then Emma found the letter that explained everything. It was written by her mother in 1985. When she was just 17 years old, Margaret wrote about the difficult decision she and Robert had made together. They were going to have a baby, but they were too young and had no way to support a child. Both sets of parents had been angry and refused to help. Margaret and Robert felt they had only one choice: to give their baby up for adoption so the child could have a better life with a family who would provide everything they could not. Emma could barely see the words on the page through her tears. She could feel the pain and heartbreak in her mother's writing. Margaret had written about how much she already loved the baby growing inside her, but how she knew that love alone would not be enough to give the child a good life. The next few letters were the most heartbreaking of all. They were written after the baby had been born and given to the adoptive family. Both Robert and Margaret wrote about how empty they felt, how the decision had torn their hearts apart even though they knew it was the right thing to do. The grief and guilt in their words was overwhelming. Emma learned that the experience had been too painful for our parents to handle together. Robert had moved away to attend university in a different city, trying to escape the memories. Margaret had stayed in Millbrook with her grandmother Rose, who was the only family member who showed her any kindness during that difficult time. For 3 long years, her parents had not spoken to each other. They were both dealing with their grief and guilt in their own ways, trying to heal from the loss of their first child. Emma found letters that Margaret had written, had never sent, letters full of longing for Robert and regret about how their love had been destroyed by circumstances beyond their control. Then, in 1988, fate had brought them together again at university. Robert had transferred to Margaret's university, and they had accidentally met in the library one day. The letters from this time showed how carefully they had rebuilt their relationship. The love was still there, stronger than ever, but so was the pain from their shared loss. They had married after graduation and had tried to build a new life together. When Emma was born in 1991, her parents had been overjoyed but also filled with complicated emotions about their second chance at parenthood. Emma found letters that showed how much her parents had wanted to be perfect parents for her, as if they could somehow make up for the child they had given away. Now Emma understood so many things about her childhood that had puzzled her before. She remembered how her parents sometimes seemed sad for no reason, especially on certain dates throughout the year that she now realized must have been her siblings' birthday or adoption day. She remembered how there were no family photographs from 1985 to 1988, years that her parents had always avoided talking about. Emma recalled how her mother would sometimes stand at the kitchen window, staring out at nothing. With tears in her eyes, she remembered how her father would sometimes hold her extra tightly when he tucked her into bed, as if he was afraid she might disappear too. The most emotional discovery came when Emma found one final letter at the bottom of the bundle. It was written by her mother to Mrs. Peterson just a few days after Emma was born. In the letter, Margaret had written about her mixed feelings of joy and guilt. She was grateful for another chance to be a mother, But she could not stop thinking about her first child. Margaret had written that she and Robert wanted to give Emma all the love they had not been able to give their first child. But she also wrote about the guilt that followed them everywhere. She wondered if their son or daughter was happy with their adoptive family. She wondered if the child thought that Robert and Margaret had not loved them enough to keep them. The truth, Margaret had written, was exactly the opposite. They had loved their first child so much that they had wanted them to have the best possible life, even if it meant breaking their own hearts. Emma cried for hours that night. She cried for her parents, who had carried this terrible secret and guilt for 30 years. She cried for the brother or sister she had never known existed. And she cried for herself, finally understanding why she had always felt like there was something missing from her family's story. But slowly, beneath all the sadness, Emma began to feel something else growing inside her heart. It was a strong determination to find her sibling and to heal the wound that had affected 3 generations of her family. Emma woke up the morning after reading all her parents' letters with a clear sense of purpose. She knew what she had to do, even though the thought terrified her. Somewhere out there was her older brother or sister, a person who shared her parents but had grown up in a completely different family. Emma felt a deep responsibility to try to find this person and bring some healing to their family's long-hidden pain. She began her search by looking up adoption agencies in the area around Millbrook. Emma called several agencies, explaining that she was looking for information about a child who had been placed for adoption in 1985. However, most of the staff members she spoke to explained that adoption records from that time period were sealed. By law, they could not share any personal information about adoptions that had taken place nearly 40 years ago. Emma felt discouraged by these early setbacks, but she refused to give up. She remembered that Mrs. Peterson had mentioned the adoption had taken place in 1985. Emma knew from her own birth certificate that she had been born at Millbrook General Hospital. It seemed likely that her sibling had been born at the same hospital. Next, Emma turned to the internet for help. She discovered that there were many websites designed to help adopted people reconnect with their birth families. These reunion websites allowed people to post information about themselves and search for family members who might be looking for them. Emma spent hours every evening after work, reading through hundreds of posts from people searching for their biological parents or children. The search was much more emotionally difficult than Emma had expected. Every time she found a post that seemed promising, her heart would race with excitement, only to be disappointed when the details did not match her family's story. There were many people born in 1985 who were looking for birth parents, but most of them were from different parts of England or had been adopted under different circumstances. Some nights, Emma would close her laptop feeling completely hopeless. She began to wonder if she was doing the right thing by searching for her sibling. What if this person did not want to be found? What if they were happy with their life and did not want their past disturbed? Emma worried that she might be causing more pain instead of healing old wounds, but every time she felt like giving up, Emma would look at the photograph of her teenage parents laughing on the beach. She would remember the pain she had read in their letters, and she would think about how much they had loved their first child. Something deep inside Emma's heart kept pushing her forward, telling her that she needed to continue searching. For 2 long months, Emma followed every possible lead. She joined online support groups for people affected by adoption. She posted her own messages on reunion websites, describing her parents and the circumstances of the adoption in 1985. She even contacted local newspapers, hoping they might run a small article about her search. Then, on a Tuesday evening in late November, Emma found something that made her heart stop beating for a moment. She was scrolling through posts on a popular adoption reunion website when she saw a message that seemed to jump off the computer screen. The post was titled "Looking for a Birth Parents, Millbrook 1985. Emma clicked on the post with trembling fingers. The message had been written by a man named Thomas who was 33 years old. He wrote that he had been born in 1985 and placed for adoption as a baby. His birth certificate showed that he had been born at Millbrook General Hospital to teenage parents who were unable to care for him. Thomas explained that he had been raised by wonderful adoptive parents who had given him a loving home, but he had always wondered about his biological family. Emma read the post 3 times to make sure she was not imagining things. Every detail matched her family's story perfectly. The hospital, the year, the location, the age of the birth parents, everything was exactly right. Thomas had even mentioned that he wondered if he had any siblings who might be looking for him, with hands that shook so badly she could barely type. Emma composed a message to Thomas through the website. She introduced herself and explained that she believed they might be brother and sister. Emma attached a copy of the photograph she had found in her grandmother's attic, along with a long letter telling Thomas everything she had learned about their parents' story. Emma spent an hour writing and rewriting her message, trying to find the right words to explain such a complicated and emotional situation. She wanted Thomas to know that their parents had loved him deeply, but she also wanted to be honest about the pain and secrecy that had surrounded his adoption. Finally, Emma took a deep breath and pressed the send button. She did not have to wait long for a response. Within just a few hours, Emma received a reply from Thomas that brought tears to her eyes. He wrote that he had been searching for his birth family for over 10 years and had never given up hope of finding them. Thomas explained that he lived in Liverpool where he worked as a carpenter, and that he had always felt like something was missing from his life. When Emma's phone rang the next evening, she knew it would be Thomas calling. Their first conversation was awkward and emotional, filled with long pauses and the sound of both of them crying. Thomas told Emma that he had been raised by loving adoptive parents who had always been honest with him about being adopted. They had encouraged him to search for his birth family when he was ready. "I always hope they thought about me sometimes," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "I used to imagine what they look like and wonder if they ever regretted giving me away. I never wanted them to feel guilty about their decision. I just wanted them to know that I was okay and that I was grateful for the life they had given me." Emma's heart felt like it was breaking and healing at the same time as she listened to her brother's words. After weeks of phone calls and messages, Emma and Thomas decided it was time to meet face to face. Emma suggested they meet at Millbrook Beach, the same beautiful stretch of sand where their parents had been photographed as happy teenagers. 30 years earlier, the idea felt perfect to both of them. It would be like coming full circle, returning to the place where their family's story had truly begun. Thomas agreed to the meeting, though he admitted to Emma that he felt nervous about returning to the town where he had been born. He had driven through Millbrook a few times over the years while searching for his birth family, but he had never stopped or spent any real time there. The thought of standing on the beach where his teenage parents had once been so happy together made him feel emotional. Emma spent the days before their meeting feeling a mixture of excitement and anxiety. She cleaned her cottage from top to bottom, prepared a photo album filled with pictures of their parents, and practiced what she would say when she first saw her brother. She wanted everything to be perfect for this moment they had both been waiting for their entire lives. On the chosen Saturday morning in June, the weather was absolutely beautiful. The sun was shining brightly, and there was a gentle breeze coming off the sea. Emma arrived at the beach early. wearing the simple blue dress and carrying the original photograph that had started her whole journey of discovery. She found the spot near the rocks where she could see the path that led down from the car park. As Emma waited, she studied the old photograph once more. She looked at her parents' young, happy faces and tried to imagine what they would think if they knew that their two children were about to meet for the first time. She hoped that somewhere, somehow, Robert and Margaret knew what was happening and that it would bring them peace. At exactly 11 o'clock. Emma saw a tall man walking down the path toward the beach, even from a distance. She could see that he had their father's gentle way of walking and their mother's graceful movements. As he came closer, Emma could see his face more clearly. Thomas had their father's kind eyes and their mother's gentle smile. There was no doubt in Emma's mind that this was her brother. Thomas spotted Emma at the same moment she recognized him. They both stopped walking and stared at each other for a few seconds, taking in the reality of finally meeting. Then, without saying a word, they ran toward each other across the sand. When they hugged for the first time, both Emma and Thomas began to cry. They held each other tightly for several minutes, not speaking but simply feeling the overwhelming emotion of being reunited after 33 years apart. These were tears of joy mixed with sadness for all the years they had missed together, all the birthdays and holidays and important moments they had never shared. When they finally stepped apart, Emma noticed that Thomas was not alone. Standing a little distance away were a young woman and two small children who had been watching the emotional reunion with warm smiles. Thomas wiped his eyes and introduced Emma to his wife Helen, and their children Lucy and James. Lucy was 7 years old with curly blonde hair, and James was 5 years old with the same kind eyes that seemed to run in their family. Emma felt her heart fill with even more joy as she realized that she was not just gaining a brother, but an entire new family. Helen hugged Emma warmly and told her how much Thomas had been looking forward to this meeting. The children were shy at first, but they quickly warmed up to their new aunt and began playing in the sand around them. The family spent the entire day on the beach, talking and sharing stories about their lives. Thomas told Emma about his childhood with his adoptive parents, David and Sarah, who had been wonderful and loving parents. They had always been honest with Thomas about his adoption and had encouraged him to search for his birth family and he felt ready. Thomas spoke about his work as a carpenter, how he had met Helen, and how much he loved being a father to Lucy and James. Emma shared her memories of growing up with Robert and Margaret. She told Thomas stories about their parents that painted a picture of the people he had never known but who had always loved him. She described their father's love of gardening and their mother's beautiful singing voice. She told him about family traditions and holidays, and about the quiet sadness that had sometimes appeared in their parents' eyes. As the afternoon sun began to sink lower in the sky, Emma felt it was important to share something special with Thomas. "I want you to know something," she said, taking his hand. "Our parents did talk about their first child sometimes. They never spoke about it directly, but I remember moments when they would hold me extra tightly, as if they were thinking about someone else. I remember times when our mother would see baby clothes in shop windows and stare at them with such longing in her eyes." Emma continued, "There were certain dates each year when they seemed especially sad, and now I understand those must have been important days related to you. They never forgot about you, Thomas. They carried you in their hearts every single day." Thomas nodded, tears streaming down his face again. "I forgive them completely," he whispered. "I understand now that they were just children themselves, trying to make the best decision they could in a difficult situation. They gave me life, and they made sure I had loving parents who could care for me properly. I could never be angry about that. as the day ended and the sun began to set over the water. The whole family gathered together on the sand. Emma suggested they take a photograph in the same spot where their parents had been captured in that moment of young love so many years ago. This time, it would be a picture of healing and reunion, a brother and sister who had found each other. Along with the new family they would now share. Emma looked at Thomas, at Helen, at little Lucy and James, and at the beach where their story had begun. She felt a deep sense of completeness that she had never experienced before. The mysterious photograph that had started as a puzzle had led to the most beautiful discovery of her life. The healing had begun not just for Emma and Thomas, but for the memory of Robert and Margaret, whose love had created both children and whose difficult sacrifice had finally found its true meaning, the end.